Good evening, everybody, and thank you for coming to tonight's revision session. Tonight, we are looking at Task 4 of Applied Management Accounting, which relates to costing systems such as activity-based costing, lifestyle costing, target costing. And let's look at the task briefing. Large. Okay. Task 4 deals with costing systems and their role in business controls. This task is worth 20 marks, so it's a substantial task which gives you 25 minutes to complete it. The first thing we talk about is activity-based costing. And in the diagram here, we've got a comparison between traditional absorption costing and activity-based costing. The difference being with traditional costing, we take all of the overheads just as a total, and then we divide it by a rate which can be per unit of output, so it can be per item produced. That works okay if you only make one product. If you only make a single product, no need to complicate things. Alternatively, per labor hour, if the majority of your costs, overhead costs, are involved in keeping people working, then labor hour. I always like to think most of us live in houses. Most houses have a kitchen. And in a kitchen, there are really two ways that you can furnish a kitchen. You can have a little team of bespoke craftsmen making nice things out of raw wood and fitting everything into every corner, and it's all beautiful, and as in Grand Designs, if anybody remembers Grand Designs, which I think is still on the go. In a case like that, there's not a lot of machinery. There are basic tools, but mostly it's people's skills. In that case, you would use the labour heads shared out per labour hour. Alternately, most of us, it certainly applies to me, most of us have a kitchen which has got cabinets that have come out of a big giant machine in a factory where raw materials go in one end of the machine and kitchen units come out the other, and there are people working there, but most of the costs of that business are to keep that machine running, and in that case we would typically use machine hours. And out of that, if we've got total overheads of £500,000 and whatever our basis is, we've got 10,000 of, well, that would give us £50, say it's per hour, and if a unit took 0.1 of an hour to make, would give us a charge of £5. Isn't that easy? And that's why traditionally that's what we always did. A more modern approach, which has kind of become increasingly popular because nowadays we have spreadsheets, we have software of different kinds, we can do more complex calculations a lot more easily. What we do now is we look at our overheads and we look at what causes overheads. Each time we change the product on a production line that we are making, we have to spend time setting up the line. Things have got to be dismantled, things have got to be constructed, items have got to be adjusted, calibrated. It all takes time, it all takes money. So if a particular range of products involves a lot of stops and starts and stops and starts, then the overheads relating to the production setups will be charged more to that product on the basis of how many times that activity has to be carried out. Alternatively, we might look at machine repair costs. I mentioned already, my kitchen came out of a giant machine in a factory. If we've 2 or 3 types of product, maybe our company makes both kinds of kitchens. We've got factory produced ones for people like you and I, like me anyway. And then we've got our little team of craftsmen. So costs relating to keeping those machines running, plainly, will allocate to the products that use the machine's time. Finally, quality control costs. Now, some items take a lot of inspecting. A precision item might need to be measured and checked very carefully. Anything that's of medical nature We very, very stringent checks indeed. Other items, if they look right, they'll do. Cosmetic items, as long as they look reasonable. So quality control costs can vary. Some types of item take a lot more effort, and we might charge it by the number of inspections. So depending on how a particular product is made, it will get a different share of the overheads. It's a lot more complicated to do it that way. But on the other hand, if we have software, if we have spreadsheets, if we have, automated data flowing from one place to another, we can do that a lot more easily nowadays than perhaps we could at one time in the past. Another, I suppose, type of costing we might call it life cycle costing. We tend to think of costing as being relevant to the product going through the line today. What overheads are we using today? What materials are we using today? What labor costs are we incurring today? And that's the cost of our product today. But in many cases nowadays, possibly even a majority of the costs of a product are incurred long before you make the first one. If you take these rather marvelous things, phones, if you want to develop a new mobile phone that's got an uprated chipset over last years, there are possibly billions, certainly millions of pounds in development costs in getting the chips to work, designing the chips. The machinery that makes the chips inside these things is incredibly complex. So before ever you make a phone, you've got a huge amount of cost. And most modern industrial high technology products, this is the case. A manufacturer will decide they're going to make a product, and it might take them 3 years before they've covered those costs. So life cycle costing, before ever we launch a product, tries to look at what will it cost us to design it, what will it then cost us to get it launched and marketed and into production. So the first stage we have research and development. Then at launch, we've got to get it introduced. We spend a lot of money marketing. Some products, we have teaser adverts that go out months before the product has even been come off the line and gone to the shops. Then there's the stage of growth where we're spending a lot of money promoting, advertising. Finally, the product becomes well known, and hopefully to an extent we make a few bob in profit. And then finally, at the end of time, it declines. Beyond that, though, in life cycle costing, even after the product has finished, there can be decommissioning costs. So there's more to it than just costs during the life of the product. We all know and love nuclear power stations, I'm sure. And if we look at the costs, the nuclear power station, the designs are fairly watching. I've got a person can't hear me. Can anybody else not hear me? Anybody else? I'm showing an audio signal. Can I just have a? Could I suggest if the sound's not working for anybody, maybe sign out and back into the meeting? I think possibly that internet disconnection we had might have disturbed it. Sorry about that. Going back to nuclear power stations, the designs are pretty much proven now. They know how to make them. But of course, the building costs are quite colossal for a power station. Once a power station is switched on and running, you don't really have to do a lot of advertising and marketing. And the raw material is relatively inexpensive. I don't think you can get uranium for pennies, but it's not an immense cost compared to the vast amount of energy created. But at the end of life of a nuclear power station, it costs billions of pounds to safely dismantle all of these radioactive lethal components from inside of it, and then they have to be encased in concrete and buried underground. So that's an extreme example, but there are plenty of significant concerns. Mining, any mining activity often can involve significant end of life costs. And life cycle costing tries to look at all of the costs at each stage of the product life. So the costs, even before you start designing a product, somebody's got to decide whether or not anybody really wants it. So there's, even costs like market research. Then we've got to design it. Once it's designed in rough, that design's got to be refined. We've got to test it. Once we're happy with our design, we've got to build somewhere to create it. There's all of these costs. So with life cycle costs, we look at every cost at each stage: costs before, costs during, and costs after. Once we've got a picture of all of those costs and we've got a total, we then put that alongside our market research and our projections of how many people we think are actually going to buy the product. And fingers crossed, the total costs that we've identified from before the beginning to after the end, divided by the number of units we think we can sell, will give a reasonable figure that's less than we think we can sell it for. So divide total costs by total units, and that will tell us over the course of that period of time the cost per unit. I think for nuclear power stations they have a thing called the levelized cost per kilowatt hour, and it's about, I think it's about 12 pence if I remember rightly. Target costing. Not sure why I'm zoomed quite so big tonight. Target costing. This kind of links in a bit with our previous point, because before ever we make a product, we've got to know that we can sell it. Nobody's going to say, well, let's I'm bored today, let's think of a new product and immediately design it. The process is along the lines of, is there anything that the world is short of at the moment? Well, we were talking about phones again. Anybody who's into techie things, I don't think I'd fancy having one, but Samsung decided people would like double width phones that you can fold flat. So it all starts with somebody having the idea that, hey, there might be a product that's worth having. Having decided that you think there's a product that people will want, your next job is to decide how much you think people will pay for it. So we identify a possible product, we work out what people will pay for it, and having established from our market research and our customer surveys and maybe past experience, once we know what we think we can sell it for, we then have to work out whether we can make it at the quantity that it will sell for at that price. So rather than traditional costing of years gone by when it was, well, this has cost me this much to make, I'm adding this much profit, and that's what you're going to pay for it. In a world where there are rather more industrial products chasing our money than money to buy them, we work backwards from a price. So we start with the selling price, work out, well, we can do this graphically, can't we? So let's say our research tells us people will pay £10 and we really want to make 25% profit. There's our profit. So that leaves us £7.50. So we've got to be able to make it for £7.50. Now we might know that our variable cost is, let's say it's £4 a unit. Variable costs. That's material and labour. So now we've got left £3.50. And what we know is we can afford to spend £3.50 fixed cost per unit. And this is actually a popular exercise in exams. Now, if we know that our total fixed costs, straight off the top of my head, are going to be £200,000, then we know that for this product to be viable at a selling price of £10, we divide 200,000 by £3.50. We've actually got to be able to sell 57,143 of them. If we can sell more than that, so we know that if we can sell 60,000 units, the product is worth doing. If at a price of £10 we can only sell 50,000 units, we know before we've spent a fortune developing, designing, producing, setting the factory up, it's not going to be viable. So that's how we work backwards. What happens in that case, though, if we find that at that price we can't sell that many units? Well, what can we try and do? We can try and make it cheaper. We can try and squeeze our variable costs a bit, because if we can do that, that'll give us a bit more leeway for fixed costs. If we can make it for £3, we can afford £4.50 fixed costs. So we only need then to sell. So we made that only £3, and that would be £4.50. 444 units. Now, I don't think that this is a particularly complex concept if you look at it this way, working this way. And yet, I've seen that there's been an AAT exam question doing the rounds for years, or a practice assessment question, asking us to work out exactly that figure on this kind of data. And it's one of the most popular email topics I've ever come across. How do they get 57,143? What's the process? If you look at it logically and you actually picture it as a product and how what goes into the cost of a product. Quick question: is there an examiner's report? There will be soon. I don't know if there have been enough AMAC exams for the examiner to have written a report yet, because normally the report looks retrospectively at exams people have done. I will check that for you. Make myself a note. Drop you an email, Peter. For anybody who's not an FI student, I should probably mention the lady asking the question is actually an enrolled student that I am already in contact with. So, very popular topic that often looks a lot more complex than it actually needs to be. So if we've got this problem, what can we do? How can we do this? How can we squeeze our variable cost down to give us this bit more room for fixed costs? I like to talk about real products, okay? I've been around long enough to see a good few products change. Let's think of a product now. This is one we're all quite familiar with, okay? Now you're going to see my fantastic art skills. Can anybody tell me what that's supposed to be? I'm hoping you're going to say car. Right. Thank you, Lisa. Told you it's not great. Let's think of the bit that goes here and here, okay? The bumper. Bumper. Now, I remember our first family car arrived in the 1960s, okay? In the 1960s, a car bumper was like a shiny steel thing like that, okay? It was chrome plated. Remember chrome plated? Chrome plate. Looks nice the day it rolls out the showroom. 2 weeks later, it's starting to go rusty. So you got to clean it all the time. I'm fortunate in my life. I've many experiences. I've never actually been run over yet, but I have it on good authority that if you got whacked by a very shiny steel chrome bumper, it hurt. Not nice. So very hard, bad for pedestrians. Add to that, it was held onto the car by these very strong brackets. So if the car was in an accident, the shock that hit the car from the bumper used to do no end of damage. So if a car ran into another car, both the cars would get wrecked because the bumpers were so solid, all the shock went into the chassis and bent it. If it hit the poor old pedestrian, nasty. Chrome plating went rusty and they cost a fortune to make. Chrome plating does not come cheap. So there's loads of reasons why that cost a lot to make, didn't really do much of a job. What have you got nowadays? Something like an outer plastic skin filled with nice soft foam, embedded in which is a bracket, but it's foam all around. So now it's plastic. Does plastic rust? No. You've got like a shock absorber built in. So again, I'm sure being run over is still not something I recommend you go and do for a bit of fun. But I would suspect that in terms of pedestrians' knees and shins and legs, a modest impact is an awful lot less painful. We'll call this the 2000s because they've been like this for a year or two now. A lot less painful than before. And of course, now the metal isn't visible. So you've got something that's much cheaper to make and does a much better job. And that is what product development and the bit, oh dear, sorry, the term that you will meet is value engineering. So you're engineering, you're designing things, not just because the market wants one that looks like that, but you're making it better and cheaper. It's win-win. So that was a little aside. And this is a general tip, though, to all of your studies. That's an extra one, isn't it? And aside to all of you, sorry, I haven't got that bit yet. Try and see real products. To me, there is nothing harder than looking in a book and all these words come out of the book. If you make it real products that you're familiar with, things that you see in the street, things you see in the shops, things you've bought, make it real, you'll make a lot more sense of it. So we can redesign the product, which is what we just talked about. Redesign the process. You hear this term bottleneck. Sometimes this bit of the process can produce 20 units an hour, then it gets to the checking bit and then only do 4 units an hour. So this one start, stop, wait, start again, stop, wait. Look at ways of smoothing the flow. Another car example, the production process. We've probably all heard about Tesla cars. They've introduced a process to the way they make their cars where the chassis of the car, which traditionally has been made out of literally dozens or even hundreds of brackets that all have to be welded or bolted or fastened together, they make 3 large pieces, this giant press the size of an office block. So they make one piece that replaces perhaps 150 separate parts, which vastly saves cost and improves quality. So the process, you look at what's not working well, you know, back in the 70s, British motorcycles were made with cylinder heads wheeled around in wheelbarrows and left out in the yard to go rusty. And no surprise that the Japanese took over. Renegotiate with suppliers. That doesn't have to be a case of ringing them up and saying, I want things cheaper. You can say to your supplier, if you supplied us in bigger batches, would it make it cheaper? If you send them in loose-in boxes rather than individually wrapped, can we have them cheaper? So lots of ways that prices can be improved. Look at something you're buying that you just don't need. Staff efficiency through training. And that goes hand in hand with our production process, because we may improve our machinery, then we're going to teach people to work it. Use cheapest. Oh, I do hate to read that, use cheaper staff. I've never worked anywhere in the world where people could say, well, you know what, we'll get rid of some of the better paid ones and get some cheap ones. It doesn't work that way, does it? But it does in AAT exams. So that is one of your fallbacks in an AAT exam, how you can reduce costs. They use this term lower grade of staff. Oof. I disapprove. Okay, target costing. Things that make a difference nowadays. Technology runs through everything, doesn't it? The benefits and their application, the challenges that may be faced. Cloud accounting. You know, we've all moved away from getting the CD. We used to get a CD, didn't we? That we it was a CD that you put in your drive and installed it, and then you had to do your backups. All well and good. Artificial intelligence. The time was, if you wanted to get a computer to do something, they had these card things, and you punched the data onto a card, put a card in another card, and then a piece of paper printed out. Then we got to the stage that we can actually type into the computer, we can ask. Then we got to the stage you can go to Google and you can type something in and it'll have a pretty good guess at what you're asking, and it'll offer stuff similar. And I'm sure you've all now had the rather unnerving experience of having a conversation with a neighbour over the fence. You're out in the garden and you say, wow, I do love that shade of green that you've just painted your fence. That's really nice. And then 20 minutes later, your phone pings up an advert for green garden fence paint. Has everybody had that or similar? Nowadays, and this really is the combination of these two. Data analytics, anything and everything that your phone sees or hears goes into a huge AI system. We'll not go down the AI road. We'll not talk too much about that. It's a little bit too, it is scary indeed. It is indeed scary. Visualization, data visualization. This is the difference between a big sheet of numbers and actually a picture. Not many people know this. I suspect not many. I didn't know it until quite recently. If ever you want an interesting 10-minute read, interesting to me anyway, interesting 10-minute read, if you Google Florence Nightingale data visualization, we think of Florence Nightingale, she was the nurse in the Crimean War in the 1850s. She had much to say about the conditions that soldiers lived in, and she produced some incredible graphic illustrations of the mortality rates of soldiers. And she would draw a graph something like, I can only sort of replicate it a bit, and she would say this was for March of 1855, and she would say that was the number of soldiers that died from wounds, and that was the number that they were the other. And then at the top she would show the ones who died from due to the conditions. And when you looked at 1 month after another, you got this pattern like this. And what she illustrated was that month after month, and this was how the diagram built up, the vast bulk of the soldiers died not from getting shot at or blown up, but by the filthy conditions that they were being treated in. And she created this chart. So Florence Nightingale data visualization, we think of it as something with computers. She did it with pen and ink, and it's quite staggering. There you go, a bit of Googling, a bit of homework if you want an interesting 10 minutes, quite interesting in my world. Okay, so let's have a look at a bit of a task. All tonight, right. The target full cost per unit of the product is ? Okay, so we're told we're going to sell for £65. We want to make 18. Okay. So 65, after we take off our profit of 18, that's going to leave us 47 for everything else. Oh. Okay. One down. Another company is developing a product it plans to sell for a price of £72 and the margin is 30%. Okay. Target full cost per unit of product is, wow, that's 72. That's 30% and that's 70%. So 70% of 72 is £50.40. And we could always work out that the 30% of that, just to be on the safe side, is going to be the other 21.60 if we wanted, just to be sure. Always worth finding ways of double checking figures if we can. Third company is developing a product that it plans to sell for a price of £16.50. So they're going to sell it for £16.50. We want to make 20%. That's £3.30, isn't it? So that's our profit, £3.30. That's going to leave us £13.20. It costs us £8.50 in bits to make one. So £13.20 less £8.50. So that's variable costs, that's our profit, our fixed costs. We can afford to spend £4.70. Yep, terrific. Yep, good to see. I just like breaking my product into slices like this and visualizing the different pieces. And to me, it just makes it so obvious and a lot less mysterious than it might otherwise be. I think we've a little bit more down the page here. No. Okay, next page. You have been provided with the following information for 2 scenarios. Should be scenarii really, but that's the world we live in. Involving a company which operates an absorption costing system. Scenario 1, 30,000 units. Scenario 2, 45,000 units. We can see our different revenue estimates, our gross profit estimates, our profit from operations, which we assume is after we've deducted our overheads. The net assets that we would need, because you can only make so many units with so many machines, you have to invest in more machinery, and the inventory that we would carry. So it's performance indicators. So our gross profit margin Well, that's that over that, isn't it? Gross profit over revenue. 3/15. 3/15. Let's show it here. 300 over 1,500. 20%. As against 810 over 2,700. That's bang on 30%. This is what we call economies of scale. I mentioned that each time you set up your production line, you've got to stop, you've got to start, you're wasting time, it costs money. One way of reducing that part of your costs is to not stop and start so often. Longer production runs. That way, less of your employee time is spent drinking tea and sitting around and waiting. More of it is spent producing. Net profit, this is what's left after everything's deducted. So that's these two. In this case, 150 over 1,500. That's a nice, neat 10%. 324 over 700 over 2,700. Whoa. 12%. Not quite such a big gap. We've expanded the machinery so we can produce more units more cheaply. But of course, machinery depreciates and it has to be maintained. And it may be with more supervisors. Either way, the gap between the two has widened somewhat there. Return on net assets. Return is another name for profit. Sure we have that one. So yeah, when you see the word return, just remember that's another name for profit. And again, there are our net assets. So we're making 150 on an investment of 1140. I hope you don't mind that I've got the figures worked out. Saves you waiting for me now with a calculator. In this case, we have 324 over a considerably greater amount of investment, with the result that very, very close now. Selling price per unit, 1,500 over 300 over 1,500 over 30. So it's got to be £50, isn't it? Yeah, of course it is. £50 against 2,700 over 45. £60. My real world mind here sees an immediate anomaly here, in that normally if you put your price up from £50 to £60, you don't increase your sales by 50%. Normally quite the reverse, isn't it? It's normally we normally associate reducing price with increasing sales, but in an exam, anything goes, anything goes. Full production cost per unit. So our production cost now, full production cost isn't given, is it? But let's think how it works. Sales minus cost of sales equals gross profit. So although we're not given our cost of production, if we know that our sales value is that and our gross profit is that, the only figure that will fit to make that work is that. So 1200 over 30. So that's a nice round £40. And in the other case, we have revenue 2700, gross profit 810. So that's 1890. 1890. 1890. 45, which is £42 a unit. I'm pretty sure that should say period. I've been through about 7 syllabus changes in my time working with AAT. It's always the same. Every book has to be rewritten, every question, every exam, everything redone. You do get the odd bit creeps through like that. If any of you see anything with any new unit, new materials, if ever you see anything in any material, do contact your tutors if you see something like that, and get clarification. Now, thing to remember is that inventory is valued at cost. Inventory is valued at cost. Inventory is not valued at selling price. So our inventory holding period is how many days worth of cost of sales we hold, not how many days worth at selling price. So if we are told that our inventory is 114, we've already established that our cost of sales is 1200, 114 over 1200. I would call that 35 days, but are we given? We're not actually. Oh, yes, we are. 2 decimal places. There you go. I broke my golden rule. Always look for an instruction on rounding, especially nowadays that exams are marked with software. Sometimes the software might be configured to allow you to put more decimal places than needed. Always worth reading question carefully. So now we have 144 over, we said 1890. In that case, 27.81 days. Generally speaking, inventory holding period, the shorter the better, because inventory has to be paid for. If it's sitting in the warehouse, it's not earning. But of course, there are times when in the real world, it's advantageous to hold more inventory. If you have the kind of product where demand is prone to fluctuation and you do get peaks, if you don't have a bit more inventory than ideal, then you'll have to say, I'm very sorry, we've run out. But we shouldn't go down that particular philosophical wormhole. We could be here all night. We nearly have been. Okay, let's look what's next. More information on, yes, this is a third scenario. So I've repeated the original data. This time we've been given scenario 3. In this case, we're not given our sales volume. We're not given our revenue or anything. What we are given are the results. So we're given the answers. We have to go hit, what do they call it in America? Jeopardy. We've got to go back from these answers to the questions. So we are told our net assets are £3 million. We are told that we're earning a 12% return on those net assets. So that means that profit over assets is 12%. So that means if we multiply both sides by assets, we can say that profit equals 12% times assets. So that times 12% equals 360,000. And you can actually substitute again. If you put 360 over 3,000, sure enough, that is indeed 12%. Always worth checking an answer that you get. If you have to work backwards to an answer and you think, oh, that sounds reasonable, but always worth running it through forward the simple way to prove that it does come back to where it should be. We're told that our profit margin is 25%. So by the same token, we know that sales times 25% equals 360,000. This pen and I are not the best of friends. Put another way, sales times 25 over 100 equals 360,000. I'm just going to have to skip round that bit. That is to say, if we flip that over, sales equals 360,000 times 100 over 25, which is 4. And 360 times 4 is 1.28 million. Notice we're using very simple building blocks. And again, this is another exercise that, you know, if I have my little top 20 of things that I'm likely to get asked on email in the next few weeks, that'll be well up the list of how do we go from net assets using these percentages back up to the figures they came from. And again, 1280, if we do it times 25%, sure enough, it does come to 360,000. We'll not spend an hour discussing this because we already did. Explain what target costing is. But what we can look at is explain advantages and disadvantages. Okay. What it is, you start with a price. That's what it is. And you work backwards. Okay. What's good about it? What's good about it? Well, I'm loath to use the word guaranteed, but we could say we've a fairly certain market because we've started by establishing what will sell. So we're fairly happy that the assuming our assumptions are correct, it takes into account competition because that's how we've established our target cost. Cheating a bit looking at the model. It's market driven. Ultimately, every business has to be driven by its customers. There's no point designing what you think is the greatest product the world's ever seen. It's the most wonderful thing. Who can remember the Sinclair C5? Anybody else remember that? I only just can. The Sinclair C5 was this rather bizarre I don't know what you call it really. It was a personal transportation device. Imagine an office chair with a wheel in front and two wheels behind, pedals and a small electric motor, and you kind of sat in, I suppose, an alternative to a bicycle. Sort of like that, and you sat in it like this, and an electric motor. And it went about half as fast as a bicycle, except it was quite this wide. So it was an utter and total, yes, it was an absolute catastrophe. That's something else you can Google when you want a 10-minute read. The last thing Sir Clive Sinclair had thought to do when he developed at immense cost this device was actually find out if anybody wanted one. So the target costing, we have at least started with our customers. So again, we should be fairly sure that if we do our figures right, our profit's going to be there, it's going to be profitable. What's the downside of target costing? It's all going to take time. And the problem the guys who make, back to these things, phones, the problem these guys have is somebody has a new idea for a phone. By the time they've got it ready to launch, somebody else has already had a better one. So the problem you do have, and I suppose if you're out there doing lots of market research, the danger is your competitors will get wind of it because people talk. So your problem there is that you've had this great idea, but before you've even done your sums and got it in production, somebody else is out there quicker. I can't think of an example of that. Something flew through my head then, an example of that actually happening. Somebody had a great idea, and by the time they launched it, they didn't get there first. Okay, there's some thoughts for us. Last of all, I'm pretty sure this is the last question. You've been asked to explain 3 benefits and 1 drawback. Now, here's an exam tip. Don't give 8 benefits and no drawbacks, because you will not get the mark for drawback. Don't give 1 benefit and 5 drawbacks, because you won't get the 3 marks for 3 benefits. Most obvious one is access. You can be sitting on the bus with your phone in your hand and you can get at your company accounts. Woo, amazing. I'm going to say security as a benefit, because although it means your data is in third-party hands, we would hope that they are secure. If you've got your own local accounting software, it's vital that somebody backs it up. And I've certainly experienced a situation where I had the job of specifying and configuring and setting up systems and then delegating the backup. And then when I spot checked sometime later, I've found backups forgotten. One system used an old mechanical hard drive where the person had like a plug-in hard drive that would back up to that, take it home. And when I tested it, that failed because it turned out she'd been keeping it in like a lean-to porch at her house, the lady who did the job, and it got below freezing in the winter. And old-fashioned mechanical hard drives did not like being frozen and then brought into a warm office full of steam from the kettle that was ever boiling in the corner. And that backup didn't work. With cloud accounting, I think we can all probably be fairly confident that Sage's backup routines are pretty dependable. There's an argument for cash flow, because you don't have to spend, I don't know, £2,000-3,000 even for your software. You just rent it. So you just pay a few quid a month which is nice. Integration. Nowadays, of course, you know, your software will talk to your bank quicker than you can. Your bank data's in there. So, all right, that's 4. Pick any 3 from. Okay, what else? What can we think of for drawbacks? What's not good? Reliance on what happened to us at the start of the session. Internet connection. Third parties. You know, for development, if you've got your own software, you can have some input into the configuring of development. With cloud, you get what you're given, and it's the way. I'd always worry a bit about security of users. You know, what if somebody decides to do a bit of work at home, and their equipment isn't really up to scratch? You can have house rules that they don't do that, but sometimes people do. Oh yeah, that's a point. If people can work at home, I like that. Yes, yeah. And price dependence. Yeah, once you're in, aren't you? If people can work at home, you know, that people might be pressured to. Whereas if it's all at the office, you know, if the computer is at the office, that's where it is. Even if you work half hour late, you switch it off, you go home, job done. Whereas, you know, if your software is 24/7 available, yeah, it can be harder to get away from it. Well, hopefully tonight has been of interest. Thank you for attending tonight's session. And at this point, I will just mention that you will get an email to a link of a recording for the session. If you want to look at it again, I'll now stop that recording.